Welcome to Journey of an Aesthete podcast. I'm the host, Mitch Hampton, and we are joined by our very first for our podcast architect. An architect is on the episode today. I should say Michael Mesrchat, right? Did I do justice to your name? Is that
Merschat? Just Merschat's really easy. Yeah,
Merschat. Okay,
Merschat.
Michael Mesrchat.
Yeah.
It's not easy for me. So
yeah, it's definitely not an easy name to pronounce.
So my apologies, but I'll try to correct that as we go forward. But you are an architect, and
that's correct.
Some of our guests, a lot of our guests are people I've never met or laid eyes on. Some of them are people that I've met personally, like say Bob Magnum and his wife Beth, and you listen to, it was local. And like them, you're a partly local person, and you're an architect. And I met you at Blue Mountain Pizza, and which is like hollowed ground here in a way. So Blue Mountain, at least I think it is. I love Blue Mountain Pizza. Yeah. But I just thought it'd be interesting to have you on the show just to basically talk, or we have a conversation back and forth. But I'm going to start off, if you don't mind, something a little kind of blunt.
Sure.
What is an architect? What is architecture? So when average person reads in the paper or looks on the online and they see the name of Charles Jenks mentioned, or Michael Graves, or whomever, or Denise Scott Brown, or Phil Johnson, what do those people do? And of course, getting more to the point, what's your experience in that, or your story in that? And that's a lot.
So, yeah, that's a lot. Now, feel free to bring me back on track occasionally, as I might want.
Kind of like Architect 101, if you had somebody who didn't understand. I know everybody lives in.
I think one of the easiest ways to begin to sort of say it is, I think we're professional placemakers in a lot of ways. That we help create spaces, big or small, that enrich the environment of the people, animals, whatever that is using it. So like we hopefully have improved by us touching something. We hopefully have created something special and have improved it.
Right.
And that's just on the big picture. I think that's what every architect's goal is. It's to make something typically in the built environment that has a positive effect on the surrounding community, people, and everybody involved in that. And I think that's sort of on the basic part. And then we can talk about Philip Johnson, where skyscrapers, amazing houses, like that's.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't be pulling his name out to say that he was especially great or good or anything. I was just trying to name sort of celebrity. Here's the thing: I was naming architects that are of record. In other words, somebody that's who's semi-literate might have heard the name and said, "Oh, this person." I mean, as you know, I have I'm much more of a Charles Jenks guy than a Denise Scott Brown, Roper Venturi guy. But that's
yeah.
It's that's.
Yeah, and I think but it's sort of taking that.
Yeah. Would he answer in a similar way? So your initial answer was really interesting. So you start immediately from improving lives, almost a very lofty, idealistic, ethical, place, support, and this language is very interesting. Is that now? That's an interesting. So, but I mean, that's that. So you're saying you're there to use. You said built space, right? And you're there to create. I think the word you used was place, right? Placemaker, was that?
Yeah. I think this, we act as a placemaker, and there are other. We have colleagues in other professions that add to that mix that help improve that. But I think as an architect, that's on the bigger picture that we're creating a place, and on the most basic level in terms of the improvement. I mean, it's shelter on the most one of the basic needs you have is shelter, and so that's another piece of what the architect is there for. That it may not be the flashiest house or something like that, but it is creating a housing there for people. And then as we kind of creep up into how does that you know, the bigger it gets, how more efficiently do we house people, and do they still enjoy that built environment? And then how does the person, you know, potentially walking on the street next to said built environment feel about that? And so that's, again, is creating that place. It gives them something to talk about and walk by. Style, you know, while I know we each have different stylistic preferences, I think style, in a lot of ways, can be removed from that. There's a good building or a bad building,
Oh,
and like,
well, yeah,
and it improves the area that it's going to, and
right. And there's you know, so hold that thought. What occurs to mind is that
sure,
there's so many considerations. So you mentioned style. I wasn't even thinking at all. Most of my podcast is about style and aesthetics, and almost like it's like 5%, 1% technical things, or very sort of, and it's like 95% style, aesthetics. You know, a Proust novel, a Jacques Rivette film. You know, is the opening of P.T. Anderson's Boogie Nights a great opening in cinema history, or is it just a good opening, and things like that? That, you know, Oscar Peterson, that's very big. Yeah. Right. I mean, I have a book behind me, and do you know Roger Etlin and Richard Etlin, in Defense of Humanism, his where he defends Maya Lin's Vietnam Memorial against right-wing detractors in that book, and talks about value of scale. But that's all. I don't mean to be talking so long, but you brought up style, but I wanted to start, I guess, before style, if we can. Making a place. So you're a place maker, which is sort of like, it's not placeholder, it's placemaker. And so what you do, from what I understand, is it's really a question, isn't it, of conceiving design before the thing goes into production, right? Or before the physical, it's before that, correct? And you're sort of, and so what I'm saying is there's a lot of considerations. So talk about some of those considerations. You said good or bad building, or, you know, or plumbing.
So I think depending on what we do. So it's, and how basic of a, so I'm going to talk in terms of a higher design idea.
Okay.
And not just like, okay, this is 4 walls and a roof.
Right.
Okay. That's sort of how, you know, that notion. So I think talking about it in those terms of saying, you know, what are we trying to achieve with this house, you know, or a house building, however, whatever, let's just, I think something that probably most people can relate to initially might be a building on their street, you know, right? So a house, how is this going to make the community feel? Right. And in a lot of cases, you know, maybe it's empty a lot that's been empty for a long time.
Yeah.
We then, you know, the initial things we started looking at is like, okay, some people might say, well, just the county gives you amount of space, you maximize it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but what does that do to the street? Does that affect the scale of the other houses? Does that start to tower over the house next to it just because someone was allowed to do something? And so I think as an architect, we want to try to maximize the client's need for maybe all of that space, but trying to do it in a scaled, reasonable way that doesn't affect just the streetscape to start with. So, I mean, like, people who are walking up and down the road, they're like, oh my God, I'm walking with my dog, and I'm like, I just want to cross the street. That thing's just massive. I don't like even walking from it.
You're talking about the reaction of a certain type of person, a hypothetical person, who maybe is against bigness or against modern, wants everything nice and cozy and little tiny buildings, or maybe something's too imposing. I'm just thinking too imposing. In other words, somebody who probably, to be frankly, kind of the opposite of myself, probably a little bit, right? A little less. I'm not saying that I love all big buildings. No, far from it. But I'm not, in principle, ever. I don't think I've ever in my life ever been intimidated by a building. That just could be weirdness on my part. I've been offended by buildings. That's a very different thing than being intimidated by a building. I mean, I find many buildings ugly. A lot of modern architecture is ugly. It should be said, has to be said. I mean, I should say, for an entire year, do you remember Coleman at Boston City Hall Plaza? Architect Coleman. You know, it's a very famous building. Partly,
I know the City Hall. The name's not ringing.
Well, Government Center, City Hall Plaza. Well, he built that. And what was the firm? Coleman, McKinnell, and Knowles. Coleman. So I used to have coffee every day in the mid 2000s with Coleman at noon, because he and I took our coffee in the same part of Boston.
Oh, cool.
Every day for an hour, and just hear him. And he didn't have a lot of mental decline. It was at the end of his life. He was like 80 or something. I don't know what his age was. And he had really long white hair that went down to here, kind of like a, and he'd have, and he would just talk and talk and talk. And this might interest you. One of the things he said is that he knew that his building was a great building, meaning Government Center.
Mm-hmm.
He said because there was such hatred of it from Bostonians and people because of its, right? It's sort of, if you look at a picture of its classic mid 20th century Bauhaus oriented brutalist, right? The term brutalist building. But he almost took it as a badge of honor, almost like, so as you know, there was much pushback by many more not conservative, but more traditionalist type folks, that felt that this showed the arrogance and the kind of the lack of caring about how people felt. But, again, I'm not saying what I think or don't think, although I was very diplomatic. In fact, I sat with him so many times and he put up with me. It means that there was nothing to put up with. I never told him what I thought. I just listened because he had so many stories about Phil. So he said Philip Johnson that called him on the phone and said, it's almost like you are in the club now. He literally said this: you are a winner. We like you because of Government Center.
Yeah.
And then interesting, but of course, as you know, Jane Jacobs and not Jane Jacobs, but I don't want to get too much into Boston history, but I lived there for so many years. I lived there for close to 50 years. So, you get. And then interesting. So how does that relate to, because in a way.
So back to the notion I was talking about, I think that was an expression of art for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, just speaking back into what I see as our job, and I think really, when people talk about it, if that building had the same size and shape with traditional detailing,
mm-hmm.
would it have been so we're talking when it starts to go to taste, it's like that's very subjective. And so I think it's sort of like it's being respect. So in that early design phase that you were asking about, it's thinking about how the space is going to react to what you're creating, how everything around it reacts. Does it create a neat new spot for everybody to gather?
So that's really remarkable to me. You're asking right now about questions that I, as an outsider, as somebody that does not have your eye or your intelligence for these kinds of things at all, you're somebody who does. So you actually see the world in a different way, and that interests me. So you're not only talking about building a place, but you're talking about the place and the space responding, almost as if it's a living organism, not just people, right? Not just people. So it's a very, very interesting.
I think the world is a living organism. So so it's definitely has a reaction to, and that's sort of what I was saying. It's whether or not, big building, small building. I think it's sort of as you go, there's something about going down one of these old streets or something. And I think, and then there's a drastic change in the scale and rhythm of it.
Okay.
That it's like, think of an old tree lined street.
Yeah.
And you go down it. 2 trees are cut down. And there's a hole. Or there's now 2 big trees just sort of loom like it. And so it's how did that scale get changed to what's there? You can change styles, and I think styles can be interchangeable along that. I think there's a balance and a rhythm that make things work well and make, people want to be a part of those places. It's sort of also like why, sidewalks are better and, with streets. So, and, depending on what you give for the size of the street. Yeah.
Living here is very hard for me because the place I live was not made for pedestrians. It was made for pickup trucks and drivers and cars that's very alienating for me, extremely alienating, because number one, I can't drive. Number two, I don't have a car. Number two, I'm a walker. Yeah. And so but again, I don't want to go too far off, but that's an example. Your examples are sort of, so when Mies van der Rohe said that God is in the details, I think He was one of the people who said that. And then Stephen Sondheim agreed with him and copied him. Those are
yeah.
Is that what he's talking about when you say you go down a street and you see the detail of a tree that's a little bit too big, or a tree that's been cut out and there's a missing, like a wound, or you're going down the street and sort of that kind of evaluation? Is that detail? Are those details, or is that a different? Is that
I think that's part of the finished product, but when I think his reference to the details speaks more. I mean, I think it is important that how all of these things work. Like, just the courtyard that they create with the two towers he does in Chicago there, the two residential towers, Lakeside, they're on Lakeshore. That's a beautiful little courtyard. It's probably a little rough in the wintertime, but everywhere in Chicago is a little rough in the wintertime. But it's how everything gets put together. Like in my fourth year of college, we had a very technical. So that's your very technical year. You really think about designing mechanical systems, electrical systems. You think about designing these things. We never actually have to really design them because there are mechanical engineers, plumbing engineers, and electrical engineers that we have in our building trades. But those are things we had to learn about. And so
DC, right? This is when you were studying at your fourth year at DC,
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Oh, okay, Tennessee.
Yeah. So I went to the University of Tennessee for from between 95 and 2000.
Wow.
And
your fourth year was you're thrust in.
Fourth year. Yeah, fourth year we were kind of we had been doing drawing. That was pretty par for the course the whole time we were there. But fourth year it becomes a much more technical aspect. Like that you didn't have to remember every little, like, oh, you need a column here for your design at that point. So it became less theory and more rooted in what actually works. So the professor I had that fourth year was had worked for, and I think even studied under for a brief period of time, Mies van der Rohe.
Oh,
and so most of your projects sort of ended up looking like a Mies van der Rohe building. Was kind of the joke within the design school.
Yeah,
but the level of care that he took with us, detailing how windows go together, how the heads work, the wall section. We had to build a wall section model in his class. Yeah. Like that was a corner of the building. We had to build a model of that,
Right.
But so that's where I think a lot, that's, to me, that's where my mind goes immediately when he's like, God is in the details, because I spent, a semester with one of his disciples, if you will, in Mies being God in that context, that we really, it was about how those details worked. How did this go together? But then it also began to fold itself out into this composition. Wow. So we were talking about things like, how do we detail these things? But then how does it begin to, and he hated it when we said this, and I think that's why I say it now more, but like how the building began to read. Because he was from Arkansas too, and he would go, Mr. Merschat, how does a building read? Could you tell me about that? But it was just how the rhythm, the way that we have sort of working on this grid system that Mies was very rigid about.
Do you mind talking a little? I mean, you are now, but I guess let's dive deeper into that, because that's what my podcast is about. So, when your professor from Tennessee with the beard or goatee or whatever he had, I'm guessing a long beard. Everybody had,
he completely clean shaven, but he would just
okay, good.
He would still just talk to you.
At last, a guy that doesn't have a damn foot long beard and hair coming out of the ears. Anyhow, no, just kidding. When he is he expressing skepticism of your idea about reading a building? Is that am I making?
I think he wants
that, or is that what is the difference?
No, I think he wants us to
go of. What is he? Yeah, what is he not?
I think his skepticism is our use of the word, and so I think he very much was from a different generation within our school, for instance.
Yeah, I don't know.
And so I think when he hears someone use like it's a, I would say more so architectural theory word, like how the building reads, which as the building unfolds, it's like a book. You're getting all the parts to it. So you are the reader, the build, and so how the book reads, how the building reads. It's unfolding to you. I think he wanted us not that he even doubted that that wasn't the case.
Okay.
I think he wanted us to be able to clearly articulate to him what that meant. And so we're just not throwing out a theory word or the hot word of the moment of saying just juxtaposition just for the hell of it. Like it's
question. I take him and you to be talking for him. I guess his objection wasn't so much that the thing was a reality. People read. I mean, we read all the time. We read buildings and spaces like a novel. I do it. You do it. So that's a given. But he didn't like the abstract theory aspect of words like that, or sort of the abstraction. He wanted a more direct articulation. You think, or I don't know. I wasn't there, but
I'm unfortunately he's passed, but but he would ask us that, he would say little questions like that all along the way, but it was usually so that we understood what we were stating, how something may not exactly have meant what the same thing, because you're like, okay, I'm gonna go read, or like, have you ever seen a building read? Have you ever seen a building pick up he'd be like, have you ever seen a building pick up a book? Have you ever seen it read? And usually and it was really for us to be able to say like, oh, I understand that word. Now, what if I use that with, someone who doesn't have that nuanced idea of it? Could I be able to explain it to them? So when they said, how does the building read? I don't get, what are you saying? And I think that's one of those things in school that really that we were able to take with us, was that our ability to, or hopefully the ability for everybody to take that knowledge and be able to articulate it in a clear and concise way. Sometimes I still struggle with the concise part, but I mean, I still think it's a important thing that we got from him, and that was and so that's where the design is in the details, in my opinion. It is in the architectural details, the way the columns attach to the glass, the way that the glass attaches to the floor, and so on. And those then create the bigger tapestry of Mises' work, which is that sort of tall pinstripe skyscraper, Seagram building. No, that wasn't
Seagram. Well, yeah,
but that's of the similar. But those kind of that just design, that articulation helps the building make it so amazing and striking, is just the way those parts go together and create this whole thing where it's just glass, columns, roof, and then you go to Barcelona Pavilion, it's the roofs, the walls, how all of those kind of work together. Like the column details at, like, I think it's Villa Tugendhat and Barcelona Pavilion are just amazing. When you just go, you never focus on them in the picture. It's just a really nice picture. But then they're like, oh, you see the way that they're detailed, and I think it's like four, and one of them it's four steel angles together, like put together. And it makes a little cross in the way the column works. And so there is a level of thought and detail that goes into these things, and that's where he's putting that in, God being in those details.
Do you mind if we fast forward a little bit, because I'm little? So what
sure.
What I want to get into is to leave that behind, if we may.
Sure.
Because your initial answer to my question, I want to connect that to. So when did you start thinking in that? So two questions there, really. When did you start really thinking in that way that you articulated in the very front of our episode, when you said making space, sensitivity to how people feel, place making? Two things. When did you start thinking in those terms? And how or developing that way of approaching a building? And what were two initial projects you completed as an architect? What years? What were they? I mean, if you don't mind, those are two come to mind, different, and how they connect.
Okay.
I don't know, but just kind of wondering.
Well, so I think oddly enough, the placemaking part, I will say I went to architecture school with a background in very good grades and high school drafting.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, let me be an architect. I can do that.
Right.
And so I found my first 2 years of school really kind of getting my legs under me of just like, what is architecture? What are we doing? What am I doing? Just what is, and like, it wasn't until third year of college that we began incorporating, I think, context of what surrounds us heavily into the design of the project and how those things react and affect one another, working within city fabrics and even, in countryside too, just what are we creating by these places? One of those projects was like, it was all supposed to be essentially like earthen mounds that we move around and create a space. And I think I struggled with that one a little bit, just because that was the first, really kind of conceptualizing that. And then we got into the urban environment and looking at the grid and figuring out things off of the grid and how that began to tie together. And that's when I think it kind of like popped, that I was like, okay, there's this place that we're really connecting. And then what does our site tell us? Sometimes our site it's an infill site on a street, and we're being respectful of the lines, heights of buildings that are around us in the sky, but we can, within style, we can do whatever we need to do with style. And the same thing is like, okay, are we an open site that sits out free? Is it in the case of one of the ones I had was where, the city grids came together at two different lines. And it was clearly like, okay, this is a point of sort of, it should be celebrated. It should be noted that there's this change. And so sort of taking those things into account. So that was just, those were college projects. And that's not to answer the question about the first buildings. I will say one of the first ones, after college, I worked for a firm that did large institutional commercial jobs kind of all over the US, some cookie cutter stuff. I learned a lot about detailing and just putting projects together and stuff at that place. But one of the fortunate ones I got to work on was a public project for it was essentially like, I wouldn't call it a halfway house, but it was a facility where it was a drop-in center. Where people have kind of been in and out of society and have, in some cases within the existing structure, which was an old historic house in the 4th and Gill neighborhood in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it had like different sections of it. One section on one floor was this actual vocational section where people who are there, they're like, hey, let us help you find a job, cash register stuff, really. And then other parts was like, it was just to hang out, to feel comfortable that you had a place. And what the firm I was working for, we added a new wing that would allow us to sort of like, again, separate by floor, but really let the groups expand more, so that now there was a larger hangout space, cafeteria on the first level, and then on the upper level they had that's where the vocational ideas happen. And I did a lot of the initial design sketches. There are things like I go back to it, I'm like, it's still, a commercial building, but it was really one of the first ones that I did a sketch that removed sort of just some of okay, this is 4 walls and we put a mansard roof on it and we're done. And taking it and saying like, no, let's make the elevator look like a chimney so that we're relating to the house that we're connecting to, because we were actually connecting to the existing house, and how we made that break, and having the porch there on the front. And so still maintaining a lot of that connectivity to the street, that it wasn't just this big mass, sort of more institutional looking building, that it had looked like a house.
I see.
That it had the scale of a house to it. And
well, that's a very interesting initial. So that's not, again, I don't know you. I'm learning now in this very episode. Is that unusual for an architect's first job to be so, what should we put it, a halfway house, sort of social justice kind of? It's a house, it's yet a commercial. That
was about a year and a half in, or a year into that.
What I mean is, I guess is it, how typical is that? Because my familiar, you're talking to architects, a lot of architects say, well, I built a bank, or I built some sort of, whatever, things that are much more generic. This is a very different. This is a very. Wouldn't you say that's a noteworthy first, right? As a building, if you're dealing with people in trouble, if you're dealing, and my follow up on that is, did that set a trajectory for you to work on those kinds of issues in your architecture, be concerned about those kinds of things, or was that just a?
I think, I mean, I love the last question, or the last part. So let me just say, majority of the work I did before that project was some of the just sort of helping out on some cookie cutter stuff. We worked stuff with, I did work on Scripps Networks out in Knoxville. But it was getting to that, that was one of the first ones where I was essentially like, I guess project manager, design architect, whatever. I was not licensed at this point. So I was still at my intern level. I was still learning, acquiring hours, but that was like the first one that I really felt I had input. They took input and we incorporated it into the design. And that's where it was taking it from there, because the guy who had it, they had originally shown these people just like, oh, here's a little drawing. We're going to do something like this. And they're like, yes, move forward. And then then they were like, okay, fundraising.
Right.
And by that time I was hired.
Sure.
And it came around that it landed on my desk. And, he said, the director of our studio, because we had 4 different studios in this firm, and he had said, hey, see what you can make of this. Like try to mess with it and see what can come out. And so I spent one day, gave him a sketch, and then he's like, yeah, dude. He goes, I like it. We can't do this type of block, but you can do this and this, and so there were some parameters he came back with, like do these things, but it was still a really like special opportunity for me that I relished. And so that sort of like falls into that first one, really creating that space.
How did you feel when it was complete and you saw it sitting in wherever this part of Tennessee, sitting there in the word? What was your feeling at the time completed that, and then your feeling, but also the next building and the other building that comes to mind? We'll get to that. But what was your? That's interesting. You built something.
I felt really. I was very proud of the work I did on it. I think as I went through it and actually having colleagues walk it with me, there was like questions that would come up. And so there was a huge learning experience too, really in a lot of the detailing too. It was like, why did this end up looking like that? And I'm like, well, that's what we showed. But, there was like little things that like, it wasn't checked back against that. And so there was a lot of little learning notes that came from this in terms of detailing that I'm like, oh, that could have been better. That could have been better. That could have been better. And, for the time in Knoxville, that was, that I felt it was a worthwhile project. And I probably, might have been there another half year at the most. And then made my way up to DC after that. And that's when, and at that point I got into more, single family projects. And there was, a community co-op building that we had done, once I moved up there, that had a really nice community center. And the great part about it was the co-op was basically one of these opportunities where we weren't doing anything that special architecturally, but what we were doing we were giving people who were essentially renting these spaces the opportunity to own and not get pushed out in sort of that early, pre 2008 crash of the building boom in Washington DC at that time. So it was special in that aspect. But then after that, a lot of the work I did was, in the single family realm. And a lot of the work I still do is in the single family realm.
I mean, full disclosure, I should say I'm a card-carrying member of the New Urbanism.
Okay.
I don't know if, as you know, they're not always so keen on single-family architecture, I'm sure you know from their literature. They say, I don't know if they're depending on who it is, whether it's but that's I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but that's just something I'm very interested. I read the literature and I'm very card carrying. I kind of
Well, I think the new urban. So I think new urbanism is fine with single family, but it's how it's the planning and the use of everything. It's not the islands of single family, I think, is where they really tend to push back against the negativity of that. Because I mean, Seaside, Florida, tons of single family, but it's the incorporation of all these other parts with it, I think, that helps. Help them do that. So that's
I'm
at least my impression.
Well, I'm in a way an outsider though, because I don't have so I don't know. Sometimes I don't understand what people are talking about when they talk about things.
Oh, okay.
So what I mean is, so why do a lot of my fellow new urbanists, why were they down on single family architecture per se, which they appear to be, whether it's James Kunstler or whether is that sort of a political critique of, I don't know. And the other, we could throw that question away. I don't know. It's just
so let me just say, I think, so I actually would like to answer that in my opinion.
Okay.
On that, just to kind of help, maybe it brings some light to it for you. Because I tend to agree with a lot of what they're saying is, and that's, if I think it's about bringing people back to live in this very useful urban core.
Right.
That's in the flight, the white flight of the 60s, 70s, kind of out of the cities.
Yeah.
And the decline of the cities in the 80s, or late 70s into the 80s, that was sort of that, what the new urbanists were sort of pushing back against. Right. And that's where the single family, that, lots of drive, and so I agree with all these things.
Yeah.
Like, the drive, the need to always, I'm going to go find and drive all the way into the city. So you're burning all this gas, you're doing a lot of these things, but, and the big thing is to take advantage of that space we have close in. And so it's about increasing density, which a lot of the urbanists believe in. And so I think it's about bringing things back in, bringing life back to the street, and that human connection there, I think, is what's really important.
Well, that's I mean, it's interesting because your first two projects that you've discussed, one was a halfway house, so that's sort of that has a
well, it wasn't a halfway house, but it was the Friendship House, but I guess the best way to sort of describe it, right? It was called Friendship House, so it was, but it was yeah. Well,
let me guess. That's like but was a kind of it was a little bit it's a house, so it's and then your next project you're starting to build houses. And single family houses. So I'm just going to ask a kind of a dumb, naive question. What are the differences between being an architect on where people live, a house, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus something more commercial, residential versus commercial? What is that too big a question? That there's probably a lot. So what does it mean? Because the projects you're talking about now are building houses. There's specifications, right? There are considerations. What would those be? What's important? What are you doing when you have to do where people live, intimate house, as opposed to some other kind of building? Is that too?
No. I think I'm going to start from a very general point to that, and hopefully fine tune it to your to the questions you're starting. So I would say if you have the commercial project, and that's the way I'm going to talk about, and the commercial project could be a high rise of apartments or mixed use and apartments. It could be, a gas station, commercial, whatever, all of these things have, they have an end user in mind.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about, so then there's pro forma, there's all this, about how they want, what the money they're trying to get out of it, what they want to put in, very fixed in their, their goals, their ideas, their budget. And, our job is to take that information, create said project for them, and then, get it built, and basically act as their, we are the, ideally we are the sole arbiter of the drawing. So they take our drawings then, which have the specifications, have all the drawings in, and they give that to the builder. Builder does a price, and we then follow it all the way through to the end of construction, because it's, our insurance likes it.
Okay.
And so there's a legal reason to do it. But also, our job there is not, we don't know. I'm not there inspecting a bolt or anything like that, but I am looking to make sure with what is being built is in accordance with the drawings and thus in accordance with what the owner is paying for. And so that's our job on the commercial side. And that's still our job on the residential side. But what I'll say the difference is when we deal with a residential client, you know, so we're going to renovate someone's home, renovate someone's, you know, condo, whatever it might be. We're dealing with the end user as our client.
Okay.
Not that there's an end user in mind. And so I think it's much more personal. I take a lot more. I'm a very talkative, hands-on. I don't mind meeting somebody in a pizza place.
Yeah.
And so we do those things, and I define it as like I do a lot of hand-holding because I'm a big believer in taking you with me along the path of like, okay, well here, okay, great. So this is what we're going to do, and you know, in terms of the bit design. So I'm going to show you your designs, and you're going to know that I gave you three. You know, for instance, I gave you two design options.
I'm listening. Hold that thought. I'm listening between the lines, and it sounds like it's a much more if you're an architect on someone's home or someone's house, right? It seems to me like those, you said hand-holding, is it more emotionally intense, a little more psychologically
I mean, it's your it's your home too. And so,
of course, but that's why, right? So I guess that's a big difference. That's one of the big differences. But I guess what I'm wondering is how far have you had to go in that sort of emotional labor, if that's the phrase, or the whatever? I mean, how much? I mean, and of course, obviously, you're gifted at that. You're good at that. I mean, I think you're probably drawn to that. But what is all that? What is? For me, I don't know. I don't. That's a. Is it just part of that project, or is it? You know what I mean?
I think part of it is, you know, I try to treat everything as, you know, my recommendation.
Okay.
And try to guide them with that recommendation.
Right.
Now, I don't want to be there to pick sides.
Sure.
So, you know, I'm, you know, I can say so a lot because I'm not there to play referee or marriage counselor necessarily, though it does.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt because again, I'm so ignorant. So is that really an issue? So you said pick sides. I was gonna stupid me sides of what? Who are you talking about? Couples or we?
Okay, yeah. Within a couple, the husband's like, someone might be like, I want to do this. I think we really need to do this. And the other person's like, I want to do.
So as an architect, you're dealing with all of these considerations. That's amazing. All these.
Yeah, because you're dealing with the end user, and that's where. But I mean, but also at the same time, these are the same people that when it's done are blown away by the results.
They're happy in the end. That's,
you know, it's like the developer is blown away by the results because they came in under budget, you know, and everybody is, you know, buying the project. Like that's like the difference between commercial and, you know, your own owner.
Are there architects unlike yourself who aren't gifted at that, or don't have the emotional intelligence or sensitivity or the third? I mean, that can't do those kind of jobs. I'm just wondering, maybe this is is there a wide panoply of architects doing different kinds of things, or is that, do you know what I mean? Is that?
I think there are projects that some people prefer to work on.
Yeah.
And I enjoy the process. I enjoy deciding these things. I am not a fan of taking my drawings and just saying, here you go, and I'll see you later. You know, that's about it. Like that's not my thing.
Sure.
And so, and I mean, I think there's a wide variety of architects. You know, I think I have gravitated towards smaller firms where my experience and my opportunities are so varied. You know, because we don't have a drafting department, we don't have a design department. It's you know, that kind of idea. And so there's certain firms that like there's one group that does all the fancy design stuff,
right,
and then they turn it over to this other group who loves to just do the details,
right,
and it passes itself through. And so I think that's why I said there's you know, and there are some architects who the thing they love to write is the specifications.
I see.
Like they're like, no, I have become really good at understanding what goes into a project and how we make this work well. And it puts together a fantastic set of documents, and that's their thing.
Yeah.
And then there are the people who are like, yeah, I'm the sales guy. I'm the one that is out front talking to people, but I may not know every little thing about how everything's going together because I'm talking to 5 different projects about that. But I understand the concept, the design, some sort of big picture, and so I think everybody has their own place, and so within a big firm you may have all of those. Within a small firm you may have 2 of those, or and that's everybody's taking or like.
Fair to say that this is your beat, sort of the couple or the house and this kind of architecture. This is what you was your now is that the I guess because you're suited to that, like it better than other things, right? I think, and are good at it.
I do, and I think I think so. I believe also what I'm good at is being able to talk to people and communicate an idea. So I also think if there was an urban space, which I'm also very much a big believer in, if I needed to go out and talk to people in a group, that's something else I would have no problem doing. But maybe putting all that together, I would need people in the back end to put some of that stuff together for me. But to go and speak is something. And again, I think it's your weaknesses, your strengths, and you try to lean on your strengths and find someone to do a lot of the weaknesses for you, so you don't have to back that up. And that's, I think, with any career, that's sort of how you should be looking at it. Like if you hate doing it, like maybe pay someone to do it. That's it. And it gives us and then our joy hopefully comes through with that. I mean, I'm very much a from the heart type of architect, where some people are like, nope, it's this, pay me the money, let's go, we're done, but that's just the range of personalities. I'm going to sit there.
I mean, this is what we're talking about now is your strength. Have you been a part of projects that were the opposite of this? Like say a commercial project in a city. I'm just as a hypothetical or a real example.
Oh, yes.
This is not where I'm at home. I don't want to do this again. I'm not, again, let me be very clear. That could have been the greatest building ever made. I'm not commenting on the quality of the end result. I'm just saying the experience was not what you wanted because it wasn't heart-based. It was too technical. Is there something come to mind? I mean, like that? Or
No, I would just say I recognized harder parts of it. But because so when I went to DC, I went from a firm in Knoxville, Tennessee that was about 50 people strong, maybe a little more than that. And it wasn't all architects. It was a full service firm. So we had, every profession in it. And to a 3 to 4 person primarily residential design firm in Washington, D.C. And so I was in on certain things where I had to do stuff that I'm like, well, this isn't my wheelhouse so much. I can draw and detail something, but it's not my favorite thing to go and do. And so that figuring out that play, that learn of like, how does this go together is fun. It's enjoyable. It's not my primary thing. And then other parts like, the principal of the firm kind of did those certain things. But one of my favorite parts within any big public job, another thing I love is and we haven't talked much about this as what the architect's role is, but it's actually our role during construction when the building's being constructed is actually showing up on the site anywhere from once a week to, maybe every other week, something, depending on how the project's going and the client's needs as well. And also what's just been negotiated within the contract. But ideally once a week, you're there on site for a construction site visit and you write a report, which I hated writing the reports, but I loved the site visit because
this conforms to what we were just talking about. You had to write a report. That's part of the responsibility of the job. You hated doing that, but you love talking to the people, right? You love, right?
Yeah. That was probably the best example because you go to the site and I've looked over shop drawings, which is perfect. Enjoyed that. That's not an issue. You go to the site, and in DC, a lot of you're not knocking down new things in DC. It's like you're adding on or modifying the existing houses that are there, or commercial buildings. But typically in our case, it was a house. Because, just to build new in those locations is just that expensive. So it made a lot of sense. And so we'd come in there and you could have measured the whole thing. There's still times that you're like, wow, I had no idea there was going to be a big brick column there or something, just that we're going to take the whole wall down. There's something there. And we have to figure out how to make that work. Or, there was a job I did down in Alexandria where, the client loved site meetings, and we do 8-hour long site meetings and I found myself, with a pencil drawing crown molding details on the wall, taking pictures of it and being like, this is how we're going to do it. But then the turn part to that was I had to go back to the office and type all that up, and that's the part. And I did it. I learned from it. I recognize it's part of the job, but that's one where I know when I was in Knoxville, the guy who was our direct studio supervisor, he went through and did all of his notes on a recorder because it was still pre, phone noting, but he would just do all of it on a recorder. And when he'd get back, he'd give it to one of the secretaries and have them type it in. But I've never been in that situation where that was my option.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering your strength or joy, it sounds like joy in talking to the people, being on site and talking to the people that maybe the person or people that own the house, prospective house it's going to be built or renovation. But hold on. What I'm saying is that I didn't get to my actual question. So my question is, the thing you have joy in and you love, one of the things that you have joy in and love, in addition to drawing, of course, and thinking visually, how does that joy or that strength, what differences does that make in the final building? In other words, do you see a one-to-one connection behind, I made this bond with this person, I'm on site, and I see the payoff of the better results in the house? Is that going too far? Is that just
one of the big points I have about what we call it construction administration, construction observation, is that when we show up on site during construction, we're there in an administrative purpose, right? But we're also there to talk to the builder. I like showing, telling the builder, like, look, let's meet at, 15 minutes early. Basically gives them a little bit of time to be like, okay, look, don't freak out. This is what happened. We're fixing this. Or, okay, we're really confused about this. Your drawings don't look right, and so we all kind of like take care of each other. But at the same time, I'm also going to be there. I think this is the biggest thing within a project. Is it's been framed for a while. Like the framing's up. There's no drywall up. They've been running wires for, what seems like weeks. And then just one day, all the drywall goes up. And the client walks in and they see it and they're like, this is, number one, it feels great because they're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. But the first thing you have to realize you're going to say is like, listen, this looks amazing. We're at least like 3 months or it's not 3 months, but there's depending on how big the project is, there's a lot more time left to go before this is done. It's not gonna be done when they're gonna have it painted in 2 weeks or something like that. And so there's also a client management role. There's a time where there's been cases where we've had a client who's like, oh my God, that complains about a painter who, when they were the ones who were like, we got to find someone cheaper to do the paint. That paint price is ridiculous. And so they do find someone cheaper. And then they're like, they're nitpicking splotches.
I see.
And you have to come back and say like, hey, look, I know this isn't ideal, but you requested to find a cheaper painter and now we have.
Wow.
And sometimes stuff like this, and they're gonna fix some of it. They're gonna fix some of it within reason. And we talk to industry standard, but we're there because I want everybody in the end. I want me to love the pictures I'm going to take of the project. The client, I want them to be thrilled with the project. I want the builder to be like, yeah, I made my money just like I should. I came out of there happy. I want to work with that architect again. This client was great. I bet you they would even, let me be they would be a referral for me. Like that's my goal for the end of these projects, is that everybody comes out of it saying it was a great experience.
Experience, yeah.
Yeah, and that we all want to do it. It could do it again. Maybe not, especially the homeowner, maybe not the next day, but
Yeah.
like that it's something that it was worked well enough that we all were like, yeah, I could get on board with this again.
Interesting. In that example you just mentioned, that's a lot. I mean, I was overwhelmed. I'm glad I would not want to do your job or any of that. It's not so I actually got overwhelmed thinking, God, this person wanted cheaper labor and the paint wasn't as good possibly, or the labor wasn't as good possibly, but they asked for it. And then I'm thinking to myself, I don't know. Well, this is my point of view. It seems like you have a lot of personal psychological issues in your work. It's not just a matter of, it's not just a matter of design. Here are the materials, let's build it. Right. It's not that.
No. Yeah. It is an artistic experience.
Yeah. But I'm glad. I don't think I would want to, I wouldn't want to do any of that. I'm thankful that there are people like yourself that, but does it ever get a little too intense, or do you ever get a little bit, or do you just relish it, or do you usually, or?
I try to get better with this, but there are those moments where you're like, what are they going to say about this? Or you realize you've done something and you're like, okay, well, I need to point this out, playing out those things in your mind.
Right.
Also, there's the issue with, and I've really dealt with this more so, and I try not to work with this as developer clients as much, but within developer clients that they're like, hey, I think we should do this.
Okay.
And I'm like, I highly don't, and like I could giving them like a itemized list of reasons like why we shouldn't do this.
Oh, wow.
And they still want to do it because they like how it could look in the photographs to sell it. I'm like, but for me, I'm like, it's not a bit good. Like there was one incident in particular where we're renovating a bungalow in Northeast DC, and adding a second floor to it. I mean, so it's really becoming less and less bungalow, but they have this nice front porch to it, and they wanted to put keep the entrance in the center of the house of the front porch. Now, we're not making the footprint of this house any bigger. We're just going up on it.
Sure.
And so this is not a deep house, and they wanted these big glass doors out the back. And so I am all for when it is the mountains of Western North Carolina, the Rockies, beautiful beachside, whatever, I want to open that door and you can see all the way through the house to this gorgeous view. It's like having the painting there.
Yeah.
But when you open the door, the front door, and you see through to the back door and it's an alley in Northeast Washington, DC, it's not the same thing. It's not that open, see-through, almost modern kind of like it was just really disappointing. Whereas I was like, I want to move the door off to the side so we can have a proper living room where someone can feel like I'm in my living room. I have my deck here. I can still go out to the deck, but my front door is off to the side here. There's a little seating area where I can hang up coats, take my shoes off, whatever it needed to do. And I can walk over to this door to the side, and there's a bit of protection, if you will, from the seating area in the living room. And someone comes in, they're like, oh, hi, everybody. Here's my living room. And then you see the opening that takes you back to the kitchen on the other side. And you're like, oh, let's go back there. And then the house begins to unfold or read or tell that story to the visitor of how they're moving through the home. And that's that sort of nuanced attitude that I try to bring to the projects that they were not seeing. And it was just, that was one of those frustrating moments where I was just like, I can't, but that's all you can do. Again, in the end, it's your creative endeavor. It's your creative ideas that you're putting on paper, but it's their money and they're the ones that really have to live in it. And so that's why I try to talk about what I'm doing is educating the client as to what their options are and how this could look. And it's their choice as to how they do it. Would it be great if I had a client that had just a huge budget and just said, design me something? That's what I want. I'm not quite there yet. But those are those next steps. And or like I need a project that's, it's quintessentially you. I want these elements in it, but I don't, everything else, it's all up, it's up to you. The design, the shape, everything else, you put that together for me and bring it. And so that typically is not most architects' case for what their home projects are. I mean, I've got books of people's work up there that they do have those types of projects, but it also was something that had happened for them over time, and with getting the right clients at the beginning. But those are still people who have that they come back and they're like, hey, I still would like you to do this, this, and this for the house. So it's rarely is it ever a fully artistic expression. I visited one home last year in Utah during an architecture conference.
Okay.
And it was pure sculptural artistic expression. It was it was so modern you'd want to be a caveman. It was just, but it was so over the top. It was just like it was a piece of art.
Wow.
Not a place to live in. And it had nice big spaces, but it was just like you're in it, and it just didn't have like the warmth. And we saw plenty of other really, really modern homes on that same tour, and they felt like home. This felt like a sculpture.
Are there houses that you really detest or hate? Like, I mean, I don't say that's that category, but you had reservations about it. You said it wasn't cozy or wasn't this or that other thing. Like in popular culture and media. So what comes to mind is the famous the movie Body Double.
Okay.
Brian De Palma, that flying saucer. It's a very famous Los Angeles home.
Yes.
Right.
Is that the one? It was also in James Bond too? Or no?
I'm sure it was, and probably is in many movies, but it's most famous for that movie because of the plot and I mean, again, I'm not assuming anybody's seen it. I mean, I happen to like the movie and I saw it. I'm 56, so I saw it when it came out as a teenager, so the theaters. But anyhow, that's quite a house, or some of that houses in LA, in documentary about Los Angeles, or oh goodness, names are getting a little slippery. When you see that house, do you just sort of hate it or dislike it, or is it opposed to your? I don't know. I'm just wondering out loud. Do you think that a revolving bed should be in there, or some things that are, of taste that's not your own, or what are there? So what are the different styles? What is it about a house like that? Again, we're using it metaphorically, not that. It's not necessarily about that house. That makes me look at that and think that's kind of cool. I would want to live in that. Is it because I am a lifelong bachelor and not a family guy that I would be more attracted to that and not offended by that? Is it that, or is it other things, or who are there people that just love it, or I'm thinking further, are there people that maybe respect it and like it but wouldn't want to do it? Unpack that. What is, you know what I'm saying? So what is it?
Okay, so I want to also, for anybody, it is. I did look at it's the Chemosphere is the name of it. It was John Lautner was the architect.
Right.
But it's for anybody that wants it. But it's owned by Benedict Taschen, the publisher now. So
of course.
Which I think. So it's so for me when I see it, I'm like, oh, I'd love to visit.
Right.
I don't know if I'd want to necessarily live there, and I don't know if it has. If me as a bachelor.
I'm just having fun.
No. But I think me as a bachelor, I don't necessarily know that I would have wanted to live. For me, stylistically, I don't know that that's ever been. I think it's one of those ones where it's like the Charles and Ray Eames houses that like sort of sit out on that. I love that's, and I would say that's as much glass and as similar as this one. The shape is different, and where I'm like, I love those. But this, I'm like, I'm not quite there for it. So, do these
decisions to live like that or not? I mentioned that I don't live that way mainly because I can't afford to live in a house like that. Live that way now. That's another. We could get that towards the end. I want to ask about economic issues and the unaffordability of most architecture and the real estate market. I want to, before we conclude, I want you to comment on that because it's a big issue for a lot of people's lives. Putting that off to one side, does these differences in style and taste the fact that I'm not adverse to that house, let's say, I don't live in it, I mean, are those related to political polarization, cultural issues, religious, secular? Is it all part of the same mix? Is it all? As a house architect, are you? A lot of your clients, shall we say, put it this way, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully, not necessarily politically traditional or conservative, but they're doing the conventional thing. They have 3 kids or they have 2 kids, and they're sort of. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, is that like a certain kind of client that you have to be sensitive to those things I just mentioned, versus a client who's a single person, or versus a client who, I don't know, you could have a client that's a queer couple. You could have client, there's 100, you know.
So I've done, I've had a multitude of different clients.
Oh yeah.
But I will say, I think the biggest thing with a client architect relationship, at least especially in a home, within that. And fortunately, I've never been big enough that I've had to take a job. Right.
Oh.
So I've been able to be like, yeah, I can get this job. This is the job I want.
Yeah.
But there's other times where I'm like, oh, that's not. And I think it's important. And it's important and this is part of my, get to know me process when I meet with a potential client. This is, it's like, how do we work?
Right.
Like, are you the type of person who says, well, I've got some drawings, I need you to do drawings? And I'm like, I don't do drawings, I do designs.
Right.
And then there's the person who's like, well, I'd like to really draw with you. And I'm like, okay, well, that costs more. That it's like the more involved you are, the more expensive it gets.
Right. But those 2 things to me aren't they red flags? I mean, you're the professional. Why do they?
They are.
Are they just not understand? Is that an example of clients not understanding what an architect does, or is that more? That?
So I have had a client who sometimes they don't realize what they're saying.
Oh, I see.
And so sometimes I'll take, like, I had someone reach out to me recently who used the word, I need some drawings. And so at first glance, I was like, oh, I don't know about this. Tell me what you need. And then,
what does that even mean? They want to hire you. They don't. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be.
Well, it's sort of like in the beginning stages of like the contact me page on our website and stuff. And so they, it's like, ideally it's like, what's your budget? What's your, what's your project? What's your budget? Tell me more about this timeline. And I looked into the email a little bit, and I was like, oh, this person's a designer. And so I was like, I'm gonna check, because like that, it was just enough, and also likes modern, so it fell under another thing that I'm like, okay, well, let's see what it is. And it turns out, after we had a nice long phone conversation, this was a person who needed some of my services, but also had their own professional services that they could render for a lot of like the interior finish stuff that I normally handle. And so they were really looking for, they had plans of a house that basically they're to be the basis of the program. So it's a programmatic base. And that, they wanted to, they, of course, like, a lot of us designers would probably don't have the money that we, to build what we'd like to build. Yeah. And so we have to find other ways to do it. So she's probably going to act as her own general contractor. So through that discussion, I came out of it with someone who's like, I want an architect's input. I'm totally cool with, like, show me what we can do. I have ideas of like design styles, and they are not looking for me to copy them or anything. And that's something I always like to sit down and talk to a client, like, show me what you like. Tell me what modern farmhouse means to you.
Right.
And then some people will show you that, and you sit there and go, okay, that's just traditional. They have some modern stuff inside of it. I was like, or some people are like, oh, I want to do this modern house, and I want glass everywhere and this. And then it turns out like I must have a gable roof, and I need, some, and so there's a process that with every client, you have to, that's part of our professional duties, like sort of sit there and say like, okay, well, this, and I write it into my scope. I'm like, I'm going to sit there and explain this to you and talk to you about like what it is, because I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your money.
Sure.
Like, let's make sure we're all on the same page. And I think that's, potentially maybe where we do a disservice. Maybe that's where both do a disservice to each other, because we're, someone's like, I really want to get the job, and the other one's like, I really don't want to spend much money, and so I'm not going to tell them everything they need to know. And so it runs into an issue there. So that's the how to work with, and how you have those people who do come in and say, I want these things, but then you talk to them, you're like, this will work, we can do this. So and I fortunately have time, budget into projects where I'm going to look into these things rather than just saying like, yes, no, maybe, and move on. So I kind of think about how this is going to be approached. And I'm small, we're agile, we're relatively new. So it's something that also allows us a bit of grace to figure those things out too.
That's fascinating. So you, and I guess about a lot of different styles. I was just wondering, wondering out loud. Well, what are going back, piggybacking off of that example of that very very striking house. It's a flying saucer Jetson style, 80s house. I don't know. So let me. What are some of the basic baseline base level differences between, say, when one is an architect, or when you are an architect whose client is an urban sophisticate, say, if they are in Chicago, Los Angeles, I mean, just a hypothetical, not to be real, versus like the people living in a farmhouse that got some money, some retirees or something that are little more country, a little more rural. I'm just using, what are some of if you had to make a list to like a person, an alien from another planet, had to say, well, what are these differences, how these people live and how what their priorities are? What are some basic differences or things in each one or column? Is that, what I mean? So is it too big?
Well, I would say in a lot of cases, the two people, like these two groups that theoretically were just defined, may have tons of overlaps and may have tons of disagreements. Like the person who lives in that high rise, for all we know, is like, what, I want to be comfortable here. I want, space. I would like a green wall inside my house because I want the air quality to be better. But what we also don't know in that is, does this urban sophisticate spend 2 months every summer hiking the Appalachian Trail or in the woods somewhere?
That's right.
And so there's a
whitewater kayaking. Is that what it's called? I don't know.
I mean, and who knows if the farmhouse person, the farmhouse, so there is a mix, and it's sort of, and that's our job as architects to sort of pull out those needs for where we are. And something I wanted to mention to you, we started on the style and like, is there a house I hate? And I think I would lean towards a house that doesn't work functionally. Is probably the biggest thing I hate about any house. I don't care what style it's done in. If you walk into it and it doesn't lay out properly, it doesn't like, it's not intuitive, whether it's everything's on center, there's 3 openings, there's, very traditional detailing, or is it like we have skews, there's a nice beautiful line, there's like, and it's like, oh, there's the kitchen, everything. If it
I'm going to ask you, Michael, you're obviously sensitive to this question of whether a house is dysfunctional or functional or not, right? Has the ratio of problem houses or houses that objectively aren't as good or dysfunctional, is that more or less constant? Has it become more a problem in certain areas or less of a, what I'm saying? What do you think? So what's your sense of as you scan the landscape, and how do you look out for that? Well, I mean, of course, you're never going to build a house like that, but how do you lean the client away from the dysfunction and try to get them to embrace something that works and something that, or is that
I think I try to get it if it's a client of mine.
Yeah.
So if it's a client of mine, I again try to get to the bottom of what they're asking for.
Sure.
Because it doesn't always make so. I have a client who we're working on their project right now who asked about building this funky door for an outdoor closet.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, we can just make the door wider. It doesn't need like, I don't understand. And like, I kind of went back to him and he's like, well, I want to do this and it's going to be, I was like, okay, but this doesn't make sense fully. Why are we wanting to do this? And eventually they come to he's like, I really want to build this for the house. I'm like, oh, well, I understand. Like,
Okay.
yeah, let's build it. So it's sort of, it's that discussion that we say that it's like,
Was that
someone you tell me to do.
is that
Yeah.
let me try to, is that a case where the client is not using the accurate language of what he actually wants, or is so what's in his mind? So is that a case where what's in his mind's eye is okay, but he's not expressing it in a way that's accurate to what he?
No, that one was one where I think he what's in his mind, what he's asking me to do is very much matter of fact of what he wants to do.
Okay.
But I couldn't in my mind, if I look at it and say like, what is that? What would that? How much is my time worth?
Oh, of course.
For me to do that exact same thing, which maybe my intrinsic value to that is really low. Whereas his cost and time for that is super expensive. It's like the same as mine is, but his intrinsic value to having been able to do that is 4 times higher than mine. And when he said, I just want to build it, I was like, oh, I get it. It's sort of like a client kind of coming in and you're like, why do you want to do this? Why must you do this? And like, you're spending a lot of money on this. I think this doesn't affect the cost one way or another. Why does this really drive it? And, getting to the root of it, and especially when it's your own home, there's times that there's like, hey, there's something I just want to do for this. I want to be sitting here in this nice kitchen we've designed and with this addition, sitting at the dining room table that I built with my hands. I can't fault someone for wanting to do that. Everybody has their own way of working with their hands. I mean, yours is music. I mean, like that's that's part of it.
Okay, let me ask you this: do you ever have clients that really are low maintenance in a good way, that they let you do your job and they let you make sure that the thing functions and it's a good house? I'm using that they don't give you a lot of grief, and how often?
Yeah,
yeah, it's great.
Oh, no, I mean. I think it happens, but I think there's probably times in that where we probably do it. We as architects probably add a little extra check-in of saying like, hey, this is what we're doing. Does this look okay? Oh yeah, it's good. Keep going. And you're like, great. I just wanted to make sure. I'm just double checking because usually, we might have had another check. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, again, I'm using my own language, like high maintenance, low maintenance. I mean, of course, possibly what I would call the high maintenance client for you would be a joy, and you like the. I don't know. What I'm saying is I'm an outsider, so I don't know. It's all right. It is all. In essence, it's all relative. I'm just trying to get a sense of.
And it's also where
different clients out there, and imagine
what they value and where they value it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think what they value and where they value it too, it also is important because now this was me just moving to DC, kind of new to residential and just sort of learning along as we went.
Yeah.
We had a client who showed him the designs, picked one, like during the meeting, had another meeting with the revised portion of the design, picked that one. And, it was just like, bam, 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 bam. They made decisions at every key point all along the way. And like their fees came in super low, but they were still working so tight on the budget that even though they're making every little decision, there was a level of anxiety and stress that you could feel in the project that I wouldn't say is a relaxed project per se. So there's those other levels where you're like, okay, well, look, we need to get this in and get, there's a time frame. They asked for like liquidated damages with the builder, like all those things. So like there was like a whole like you need to do these things, and so it was it would definitely had a higher level of stress, even though it was a client that I would say they were pretty laid back and made a lot of decisions really fast, and we didn't have to sweat those design decisions, but we there were some moments that were like, oh my gosh, okay, let's just, let's take a breath, and so those are the little things.
I mean, anecdotally, I should say, I talked to so many people here, and one theme comes up that never has come up in any conversations with anybody when I lived up north. And that is sort of, and this is, again, I'm just a messenger. There's one friend of mine who's a plumber,
And he talked over and over again of all the bad plumbing that he has had to deal with. That just is an epidemic of bad plumbing in this area. And he talked about all the different mistakes, like, so pipes freeze because he says they don't use the correct configuration of the pipes, or they make it. The biggest problem, he says, that they don't dig things down into the ground deep enough to cut cost and to be cheap. And then lo and behold, a homeowner has a pipe that bursts or a pipe that freezes because it gets a little, you get a couple days of 5 degrees, which is going to happen, in February and January. But I didn't know about any of this, and he's just talking and all these, and I'm just taking all this in again as an outsider, thinking, wow, why would contractors or laborers cut corners like that and build something so close to the surface of the soil rather than deeper down, like he said? But it's just one example, but that's a. Is that part of function as well, or those kinds of considerations, or is that a?
So my response to your question more so is an aesthetic one.
Oh,
in terms of function and aesthetics, sort of like that. So it's not does a house? I mean, if lights aren't working, but it's sort of like something I can look at a house from a street. I can't tell the plumbing what it's doing unless it's flooded. I guess there's water coming out of the second floor. It's flooded. Yeah, but generally, but yes, I think, working mechanical systems, is it somehow supposed to be passive solar, and it's not? Like, yes, that doesn't work, but it could also be remedied. It could also be an error in detailing or something like that. My first thought of having been from around here and hearing people talk about, well, the pipes are freezing, why they do it like this, my first thought is, well, did the homeowner do it?
I see. Yeah.
Or the homeowner before that homeowner, did they do it?
Right.
Because and that's one of the beauties of this area we live in, is there is a very can-do culture, and that's where I think a lot of the beautiful craft and artistry that's come from our area has been driven out of that. Like, well, I can do that. Let me figure out how to do it.
Well, what you're really saying is that a lot of these problems come from someone that lives in the house who themselves is just like wants to think of themselves as a plumber, or sort of an amateur plumber.
They're like, this guy's going to charge me $200 to come do this. I can get on the weekend. I can get $30 a pipe, and I'll fix this.
Well, my friend did say that, because my friend said when he investigated this one, he said it was clear that the homeowner had redone in a bad way what had been done, and that's one of the. But he said he did say there was a lot of it, and you're saying, I guess you're putting the positive spin on it, or the virtue is that this is a culture where people are really handy people, and they really there's craft and there's art in it, and that's the good aspect. But I guess I'm talking about the downside of people that don't know what they're doing. They live in a house and they redo somebody's work, and I didn't know. Well,
my wife and I have a discussion sometimes where my family, we could go somewhere and we're like, oh, I wonder how you do that. Whereas her family just sometimes just appreciates the thing they look at. Like, I was like, oh, how can we cook that? Can we make this? And those are the things that run through my head.
Sure.
And I think it's very common just around, especially around here, where it's because everybody was so isolated for so long. A lot of times it was sort of like, you do it yourself.
Right.
And so that sort of has permeated throughout the culture. And I think people sometimes will still do that. And I think you can make a simple mistake I think, a lot of times stuff wasn't big or built as deep.
This is all fascinating to me as somebody that can, I guess you could guess, urban sophisticated I am. I have none of these skills, nor any interest. I'm not interested in surfing or whitewater kayaking. I'm not interested in making a table. I'm not interested in sort of fixing my own water heater or anything. No, I want someone else to do it, because that's what that's their field. But I am sensitive that there's this whole other world of people that are into this stuff, and that they're Sunday, Saturday, right? And that's interesting. That's
yeah. And plumbing's not something. I mean, I will replace an occasional switch or outlet. And that's about the extent of my knowledge. Plumbing's one of those ones where it's like I know what the 2 rules of plumbing are, but I don't bother doing any plumbing. But that's it.
Right. It's interesting, right? All the different kinds of people in the world, and what's important to them or not important to them. In the case of your home
and cultural, like, are you seen as someone who does things, can put things together. Like that's how you may view yourself as that, and that's important with clients.
Sure.
And that's where that talking and that listening that happens, that we want to draw from them and their idea, and that's where when we take the artistic ideas from ourselves, put that into paper, and hopefully create that structure that they want, and that's that, and create that place. Create again, back to creating that place. What place is that?
Yeah. Well, that was your initial definition. Well, I wanted to, before we conclude, even good things come to an end, like this episode. It has been disturbing me a little bit, not to get too tendentious or too politico honest now, but a common theme for a lot of people is things are so unaffordable, rents are so high, and housing prices are so expensive, and it's really almost a breaking point where, like, almost to the point where I have acquaintances that normally were never political in their life, because of these increasing costs, increasing things, have become explicitly anti-capitalist and or people. Again, these are just passing people. What is happening? Is this a larger thing globally, or is it just a more practical thing of? So let me try to boil out the question: why are things so expensive in housing and real estate? And is it just, thoughts about that, or any?
So a lot. I mean, you can go back. I mean, I guess someone could say, I mean, on the basic side of things, like, okay, you could go all the way back and say, at some point, someone said, okay, you get more money if you make your house worth more, and there's this idea that there's equity, and you want that home value to go up, and so that happened somewhere, I think, in the 80s, and that kind of created this trend where, and then we have the bubble, then now we're back on this upswing. And during that bubble, the problem was nothing got built too. So let's just sort of, when the bubble popped, so there became this huge, like, vacuum once everybody started buying and living in things again. This vacuum of, like, okay, there's no housing, we're short on housing.
So you're saying it's a historical thing where there was a period of time. What was it? 80? Was it 08 through 11? Would you say those years? I'm just guessing. And you're saying that those years.
And somewhere in there.
You're saying
7 through 10.
That's causing these people, friends of mine, acquaintances, not necessarily me. I'm just saying this is what I hear and read, books, and that's what's causing them to have sticker shock and say, "Wow!" So you're saying the unaffordability is the lack of decisions of what happened in those years. There was a power vacuum, and people stopped. So sometimes a little thing like you don't build for 2 years. You're saying it has a boomerang effect years later? It depends on the markets too that were being built. And that's what we're missing, is that I think if they say it's the new home buyer home sort of thing that, the new urbanists wouldn't like anyways, but there's no room downtowns either to put people. So it's sort of like that, but that didn't get built. Those starts didn't happen, as I understand it. And granted, I'm not an economist, but this is, my general understanding is that things, and so we're still behind in what is needed. Right.
And so then demand, only pushes the cost up.
Right.
And so then in our area, then you throw in COVID, and then the price spikes that happened there. While those have come down a little, they're not where they once were. Like it's a lot more expensive.
Right.
And it is, it is where we are right now. And I can't say that I know where it's going, or that it's falling, or that it will. I will say it's more stable. But, and then another thing to think about too, I mean, there's a lot of, one of the things, I had a discussion with friends of mine in DC this past weekend.
Interesting.
We, where one does a lot of apartments in DC, and these are new build apartments that at one time, these were all condos. We're going to, in DC, you did them as condos, but that the condo market has basically just become so vigorously litigious that these, you have like $5,000 studio apartments in, Northeast DC that are just stunning units. I mean, just absolutely stunning units, but normally these things would be sold as homes for people to live in. And, and so now they're only become corporate apartments. So I don't know how much they're actually that there's actually a culture of people that are able to buy and live in, or that, you know, even renting those, or, you know, basically it's like, yeah, our lobbyist comes in town, they stay there or whatever, you know, that's the,
we
and
have
so
a wealthy, unusually rich class of people that are keeping things artificially high in a way because they can afford that. Is that kind of what I'm trying to yeah.
To a degree, and also just saying that the legal nature of building and the way condos work, basically you can't, as an architect, like the amount of extra insurance we have to have typically have the developer pay for us to build condos is ridiculously high, just because there's going to be a lawsuit, and there's typically always a lawsuit. Like that's just like companies. Yeah, typically nowadays, that's how it now in today's
and of course if it's that pervasive, that goes into the end cost of everything, right? You're saying that brings up everything, right? That's wow. So many considerations.
Yeah, and I mean material costs and labor costs are just more, and you know areas around here, you know, we like Asheville has, it's a bowl, so you know you kind of want to be on that inside edge of the bowl with all the mountains around it. You know, there sort of comes to being a limited amount of area where we can build, and so there's also that's something that's driving, you know, home prices to a degree around us.
Right.
But just still the cost to do renovations or additions is also a pretty pricey endeavor. And again, when you look at that for that reason, people be like, well, oh, so using an architect is so much more expensive. I think that's more reason to spend money on an architect, because if you want to spend that much money on a home, I think it's better to do it, plan it out and do it the right way, as opposed to say like, I can figure this out and do it and get it built, and then you're left with like things that don't work quite as well. So, you know, I think it's always wise to be aware of like how much you want to spend, and like, will it be worthwhile if I'm the one who ends up doing it, or am I going to need to call a plumber to come and fix my frozen pipes later on? So it's
Michael, this has been such an incredible episode because I learned so much, and I'm gonna conclude now and say, well, you're a placemaker, architect.
Yes,
that's one of the many take homes from this show. Before we conclude, is there anything you want to add or say that you feel is important, or you move to discuss or expound upon, or anything you want to?
I think the one thing, if I could have touched on anything else in addition to it, I really think is that you know, putting our land first is one of the most important things that we should be doing when it comes to building a new house, building a new commercial building, whatever it is, that we actually understand what we're doing to the land and leaving the land with, and how our decisions that we make are permanent, and that, you know, everything kind of costs you more to come around and fix it in the end. So I think it's really important that we plan smart on the front end rather than try to patch with Band-Aids on the back end.
Okay. That's beautiful. And that very much connects to your initial, in the beginning, when you talked about the land itself being alive and responding, not just people, but the space responding. And almost in my mind, I thought about space breathing.
Yes.
And land, that's a real thing. And so I want to thank you for your generosity today and your time. And I really enjoyed this, and I learned a lot.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Mike.
It was a pleasure. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time, for letting me be on. I enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing this thing get up.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Take care.